Good evening, everyone. My name is John Palfrey. I'm head of school here, and I am so thrilled to be able to welcome you all to our hot stove night at Phillips Academy. We could not be more psyched about this event. I will say I am a huge baseball fan. My favorite team in the whole world is the Phillips Academy Big Blue right here in the front. A great bunch of guys. And my favorite softball team is the girls varsity softball team here. We got some great athletes from that team as well. So in this tradition of great baseball and softball here at Andover, we have this wonderful opportunity to hear from 6 experts in the middle of winter about this game we love. I'm so excited that we have got this group assembled and enormously grateful to each of them for being a part of it. I'm in a minute going to toss the mic over to our moderator and the dean of the entire event, Peter Gammons. We're super grateful, Peter, that you are here. You need literally no introduction. You may not know that he went to Groton School in the class of 1963. It turns out that my father also was in the Groton School of 1963 and knew Peter from that. And we're so grateful, Peter, that you are here tonight. Thank you for making the trip. I'm feeling proud of it. Next to Peter, we have Matt Tabor. Matt has graduated in the past year from Milton Academy and has gone straight through the draft to the Arizona Diamondbacks. Matt, we are extremely excited to hear from current professional baseball players. So thank you for being here with us tonight. We welcome next Gus Quattlebaum, Phillips Academy class of 1993. Gus was a standout player here at Andover. If you've ever seen a picture of him playing with his peers, he was a giant. It's amazing to see what he looked like as a player here. He then went on to a very illustrious career in college where he played for Davidson. He holds, or held at least at one point, and may still hold the NCAA Division I record for the number of total bases in a game. Is that still a record, do you know?
I do not know.
In any event, he did it. 6 for 6, if I understand. Really extraordinary. Now he's the vice president for professional scouting for the Boston Red Sox. Gus, welcome back to Andover. Glad to see you. Next up, we're delighted to have Jason Bere here, a current parent, which I'm super excited about too. He was a major league pitcher, as you may know, from 1993 through 2003. He was an all-star in 1994 and has been a Cleveland Indians bullpen coach for several years. And most important, he is related to somebody in the front row here, Colby Bere. And so, Jason, thank you for being here. We're delighted to have you. Thank you. Next up is Matt Hyde, another Phillips Academy All-Star, class of 1992 here. And what is so cool is that opposing Gus Quattlebaum, his former teammate and his Phillips Academy mate, is he's now scouting for the New York Yankees. So we have the scouting team for the Yankees and the Red Sox in the house. Matt Hyde, welcome back. Thank you for all your work. Great. And batting cleanup, Duncan Webb. We're super psyched you're here. Went to St. John's Prep just down the street, which is one of our great rivals. If we can ever pull off a game with you in the early spring, I hear it often gets rained or snowed out, unfortunately. But a great program over there, class of 2000. And he's the director of international player development for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Duncan Webb, thanks for being here with us. Grateful to have you. A couple final notes before I turn it over to our moderator and get out of the way. One is we are taping the event back here, so it will be watched by others after the fact. And there are 2 people who would have been here but for the weather. We are sorry that we lost Rich Hill and we lost Buster Olney. I will say Buster and Peter Gammons and I were on the original string trying to make this happen. Buster, we're sorry you're not there. I'm shouting out to you. We hope in another year that you will also be here. Buster Olney, as you may know, ESPN analyst for baseball and also a current parent of a senior, and we are sorry to miss him, but grateful for his help in putting this together. Also in the thank yous, our team from communications, our team from AV, and a few very special people, Nancy Jetton and Belinda Traub in the head of school's office, and Kevin Graber, our baseball coach, and the entire program. Thank you for putting this together. Peter, are you going to talk a little about what a hot stove night is, or should I say a word about that?
No, I can talk about it.
Okay, sounds good. So,
starting point.
That's awesome. So I'll leave it to Peter, but the idea of a hot stove night makes me think of the early part of the 20th century in an Irish pub in Boston on a cold winter night where people who are just psyched to talk about baseball. So here we are at Andover, and to Peter Gammons, thanks for doing this, and have fun. All right.
I really appreciate everybody coming. This is what people say, oh, it's nice. This is what we all love to do. I think one thing you find about all of us that get involved in the game, whether it's writing, scouting, coaching, pitching, we love the game as much as you do. And maybe more, but I mean, I think that there's a public perception about athletes not loving what they do. That is simply not the case. I mean, it's the love of the sport. There's so many really bright people work in front offices and so forth that they could be doing anything, but they're doing it because they love baseball. And I think that's good. But you know, so we love to get together and talk about it and have a lot of fun with it. And I think, having already been asked about 4 questions already. Okay, what about Ohtani?
What about Ohtani?
Yeah.
I know we were really upset when he didn't, land with us. But from everything I've heard, I haven't seen him in person, but just really special, maybe once in a lifetime type of a talent. So I'm excited to see him, even though it will be in the wrong uniform, right city, wrong uniform.
He explained that in the end that he just didn't think it would work playing the outfield and having to pitch. He had to play in the American League. And otherwise, it was going to be either the Cubs or the Dodgers, which is not surprising.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you hear a lot of different things throughout the process about what he was looking for, and a player of that caliber, and coming from the Japanese market. I know, probably everybody up here has seen what the Japanese media, what kind of a show it is during spring training and throughout the season. And, I don't think we've ever had a player with the profile that Ohtani has. And so it will be really interesting this spring training to see what that looks like in Arizona when he's, shows up for spring training.
Well, I know, someone you work with, and it's a good friend of mine, Galen Carr, who is one of the most avid skiers I know. He said, well, the great thing about where he comes from is like the best skiing he's ever done in the world. And he explained to me, the town he grew up in northern Japan, he said, well, it's like a town of 4,000 in eastern Vermont. This is a little different, but there will be more people in the media following Ohtani in spring training than will ever talk to Mike Trout. So that's what it's like. And one thing about they get pretty excited, the Japanese media, and so when you've got like 100 guys following somebody, you've got to make sure that you stay out of the way of the cameras as they come flying by. And Matt and I have been good friends for a long time, and what I think is really interesting, and obviously Matt here is a good example of it, but just scouting people in New England and how difficult it is to be able for the element of catching up. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Oh, sure, yeah. It's such a short window that we have to watch these guys, like a Matt Tabor. You were lucky, Matty. You started in Florida with your team, just like you guys are going to do, which provides another scouting opportunity. But once you get going, it's basically April, early May. We got to make decisions. So I think the thing that Matt did last year that really put you on the map is you had trained so hard and so well during the off season to get ready for the season that when he started, you hit the ground running. And that's the biggest thing, Peter, is, these guys, to do it out of high school in the Northeast, they have to kind of come out pretty strong. And the beauty of it is, though, is so many of these kids play multiple sports. I think that's the difference with the Northeast is they play football, they play basketball, some guys will play hockey. And those other sports, I think, help them. They have more room to develop. They're less of the finished product. So that's the fun of it.
Jason, I remember very well when you were on one of the best young pitching staffs I ever saw with the White Sox back in the 90s. But I'd love to know how different it is today in terms of major league coaching and preparing pitchers as it was when you were coming up when you were on that staff with Jack McDowell and so forth for the White Sox.
Well, I think in today's game, there's a lot more analytics in play, and how you're going to relay that information to each individual pitcher. Not to say that we didn't prepare back then, but I think we just prepared in a different way. We worked just as hard, but there was probably less information to dig into. It's funny, Matt and I were just talking that, sometimes the players, a lot of players are going to do what they want, but when you show players now the information that you have and how to apply it, they really gravitate towards that, and especially when they start finding success with it, and they want more and more and more. I think your job as a coach is to not overload them with information, but because there are a few guys, and there were a few guys in Cleveland that almost wanted too much information, because you never want to suck the athlete out of the athlete. But in the end, I think the players are receptive to the information. It's just up to the coach to break it down for them.
And Gus, I met you on this campus a few years ago through mutual friends. But when you're in front office in Boston and on decision-making level, how different is it with the pressure that's on every decision that gets made in your front office than it is, say, if you were in the front office in Milwaukee or San Diego?
I think it's just as challenging for those guys in San Diego, Milwaukee. I'll say when things aren't going well for our club, and Duncan used to work with us in the office, he can speak to this. He will be a parent soon, but there'll be times when you're dropping your girls off at elementary school and people are criticizing David Price, or you have to field you're just worried about getting them off to school and make sure they have their lunch bag. That's about it. And they're asking you about, why is David Price doing this? Why is Mookie struggling with the breaking ball? And that kind of stuff. But there is an added scrutiny here, but the fact that people care about the Red Sox is what drives us. And if they didn't care, they wouldn't say anything.
Back in the 2007 World Series with Colorado, the first game, I can't remember, I think it was 10-8, the Red Sox beat the Rockies. And the next day, Matt Holliday, who was one of my favorite guys, said to me, this is what baseball is. This is what it should be. Now, he grew up baseball guy. His father was coach for many, many years, gave John Farrell his first job, in fact, and his brother coaches at Oklahoma State now and so forth. But he said the difference in Boston, as opposed to Colorado and a couple of other places I've played, is that people anticipate, so that there's always tension in the ball. Other people, most sports fans react. In Boston, they anticipate. So the level of tension. I mean, for 25 years, I had season tickets down and back at home plate, and all of you guys, it's amazing how tense people get. And it's just not that way. I mean, I can sit in the fourth round in Anaheim or someplace like that. It's nice, it's pretty, it's warmer. But it's just not the same. There's a tension there. And what I found interesting is that Tulowitzki was in the same hitting group, and he came up and said, it's the first time I've ever experienced this in my life. And he said, this is the greatest baseball experience. And I thought, it fascinated me, because the Red Sox are already won the first game. So now they're down 1-0. They're playing at Fenway Park in game 2. I don't think anybody really thought that Colorado was going to win. But that wasn't the point. It was two guys who just appreciated, hey, this is what it should be. It should really be fun. And I think it's a big part of what makes the city so great.
We have to remind, I think Duncan can speak to this, but there are times we get buried in the bowels of Fenway, and It's almost like Vegas, where you don't see the sunlight, you don't know what time it is. And sometimes we just have to go outside, sit in the seats, and just remind ourselves where we work. And that's, I know I have to do that sometimes because the pressure can add up.
It's amazing how the atmosphere that surrounds the team really reflects the culture of the city. And I've seen that now working for a team in Los Angeles. I mean, it's so much more of a relaxed attitude towards the Dodgers. I mean, I was sitting there my first season. They send out the clips every day in an email, from the newspapers, and we had lost 2 in a row, and I'm like, well, here we go. They're gonna get on Puig, they're gonna get on everybody, and there was none of that. And I was expecting it because that's how things were in Boston. It was, the sky was falling every time, something negative happened. And people in LA, I don't know if it's that they don't pay as close attention to the Dodgers or it's just a different attitude, but it's really palpable throughout the course of the season, just the difference in how, and people feel that way about the cities too. LA is much more relaxed and laid back. Boston, I don't know, maybe a little more uptight.
No, that's really true. Well, I thought it would be really fun to have Matt, and I really appreciate that he came, because I thought it would be fun for all of you. I know a lot of you know him, but to think that he was pitching the private school league last year, and now he's in the Arizona farm system, and it would be really good just for you to hear, if you have questions for him. But how much of growing up here in Boston fueled you to really make the push that you made? Like last winter, the quantitative jump that you made, it was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think just like a big part of it is like kind of the struggles we face as we realize, like, guys in Florida, most players come from Florida, California. We don't have the same advantages that they do, so we got to work twice as hard to, be even on the same level as those guys. So that's kind of, that's where my motivation came from. And that's not just me, that's pretty much, a lot of baseball players in the Northeast. We have that kind of, that grit that other players don't have,
Well, it's just sort of fun to see. Well, I'm not going to sit here and lecture. I just wanted to sort of introduce everybody, because I think this is your night. So whatever you want to ask, feel free to ask us. We're here to answer. Yes, sir.
I have one question. How come no Japanese players make any attempt to speak English? All the Hispanic guys do their best to speak English.
I wish that I could speak English as well as Ichiro does.
Well, that's the thing. I've heard that he can speak, and that a lot more of them can, but they don't. You have translators. And how does that impact team morale?
Well, I've actually talked at length with Ichiro, who's one of the most interesting people, and one of the biggest baseball freaks I've ever encountered. He goes to the Hall of Fame every off season and studies for like hours going through stuff. For one thing, if you don't have to answer the questions, it takes a lot of time out of your day. I mean, as I say, he can really speak English. I first knew it when Bob Melvin, who now manages the A's, managed him in Seattle. Ichiro and his wife were very close to Bob and his wife. And Bob would say, we go out to dinner like 2 or 3 times a week, and it's great. And when the Japanese won the first WBC, we were doing it on ESPN where I worked at the time. It was ridiculous to make predictions on who was going to win it. I mean, predictions are pretty silly to start with, but predicting who was going to win something that had never been played before. But I picked Japan. I figured they'd be the most serious. They probably started training 1st of January for a March tournament. And so it was a big deal. And I had about 4 games with the Japanese where I would sit. I was the reporter on the field, so I would be sitting in a chair right next to where, right next to the dugout, and he would just come there and talk the whole game. I mean, it was fascinating to listen to him. So when the tournament was over, I said, you've never done an interview in English. Could you just do one? It would really be something. And he said, oh, sure. So he did the usual, what do people do after games? They ask 3 questions. Goodbye. But my last question was, when you make it to the Hall of Fame, is your acceptance speech going to be in English or in Japanese? He said, no, Spanish. I swear better in Spanish. So.
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction too, with the Japanese players, just because the presence of an interpreter is there doesn't mean that they can't speak English. A lot of them come to the States a little bit older than some of the players from Latin America who sign at 16 and, go through the minor league system where they're given English classes and they're around English-speaking teammates more often. A lot of Japanese players are thrown into the major leagues right away, and they're a little bit older. They don't have that same time to learn the language. But as Peter said, some of them do speak English. It's just that they've got the interpreter there, and so they choose that might be an easier way to go about it. But speaking from working with Latin American players, I know it was a big deal a couple of years ago. I think it was Carlos Beltran who said, why is it that the Japanese players get an interpreter but the Spanish-speaking players don't? And no one had a good reason, because there is no good reason for that. And so now every team is required to supply an interpreter for the Spanish-speaking players as well.
And I think one thing that the comfort level, a lot of the foreign players, the comfort level with the English-speaking media is not great. From Los Angeles with Puig, he just wasn't comfortable. And there was enough controversy going so that he struggled with it. And I had the good fortune of, when my cousin George Lombard went to coach with the Dodgers, George's wife is Cuban, and so he speaks good Spanish. And he had talked a lot to Yasiel about me and about, go up and talk and speak English to him, and you can, it'd be good for you to start to learn to build relationships with people who speak in the English media, and it really worked. But I understand. There were guys. El Duque went 5 years, and everybody, he doesn't speak English. And one day I was in the old Gold's Gym back at Fenway Park, and I was working out. He came over and started talking. I went, this guy sounds like an English professor. And he said, look, it's just a much easier life. I knew English 6 months after I got to the States. I didn't tell anybody. It made my job easy. Yes.
I'm curious about how you would describe the art of evaluating the potential of a future major league player. Statistics, obviously, in various ways, and you play those out through whatever computer program you have, but how important are the intangibles of the individual personality, and how do you judge them?
Well, that's one of the tools that we're always trying to grasp, and that's makeup of a player. If we could come up with a machine that gives us the makeup of an 18-year-old kid in Massachusetts or a 16-year-old down in the Dominican, we'll have a huge competitive edge. But we've gone to great lengths to build a behavioral health department. Dodgers have done the same. We do personality evaluations. We're still trying to wrap our heads around it. We don't know. But I would say the stats play a huge part. The higher you go, level-wise, like in the major leagues, obviously we have a ton of information at our disposal. But if you're with Duncan down in the Dominican, there are no stats down there. You're watching a 15-year-old, 14-year-old in a workout. They don't play games, okay? They may run the 60 for you. They'll throw from right field, get to see them field a few ground balls, throw it in, and then you try to set up an inter-squad, sort of a scrimmage, get a few at-bats. And then, okay, Duncan, you need to make $1 million decision if this kid's going to hit in Dodger Stadium in 5 years.
Well,
So,
Matt, you spend a lot of time in the off season
Yeah.
with all the kids from New England, so you get to know them. That's a big part of it.
It's huge. And I think it's the importance of scouts, and scouts that have a Rolodex of information from their experiences of seeing guys like Matt Tabor, when they were 18 years old, 17 years old. And I know it's a huge part of what we do. It's a separator because it allows Damon Oppenheimer to take an Aaron Judge because he knows that Troy Afner, the area guy, knows this guy better than anybody. and knows, the makeup, the character, the preparation, and all those intangibles. It's not an exact science, but I think it makes what we do especially fun. For me, it's great to be around these guys. Like you take Trout when he was in high school, and seeing him against good competition, but seeing him on a daily basis and really trying to figure out what makes him tick, and then knowing that those intangibles are a separator. The skills are easy to see, and evaluate, but what they're all about is what makes them who they are.
How important are those psychological tests that so many teams use today?
We don't do them. We do a separate way. We have people who meet with the players individually and talk to them. Remember, Maddie did that during the spring. We have some really good people. But I think it's all, Duncan, you guys have used them, right?
Yep.
The Dodgers and
We've
Gus, you guys
we've
use
had some services that we've paid a ton of money for that would try to help us with a personality assessment. And the more we listened and listened in the draft room, the less we understood. And we finally decided at one point, I'd say it was about 6 years ago, we need to build our own model. We need to be able to look under the hood and figure out what variables matter the most to us, to what works in Boston. Because not every player fits in Boston, as we've seen. We've made some trades, or we've signed some free agents that have not panned out in Boston. So we're trying to learn from all those things. Right now, we are in the process of building our own personality assessment that's position specific, because what makes a closer tick is very different than a starter that's in a rotation, only has to go once every 5 days. That's taxing, but it's a different mentality. If you're a reliever who just blew the game the night before, you better have that type of makeup where you can shake that off, take the ball the next day. So we're trying to gear that to position specific traits to get to. And then once we get them, we're trying to use those assessments with our behavioral health department to sort of nurse them along as they climb through our system and get them ready with the rookie development program, which starts on Monday. All that sort of leads them all the way up to Boston. Or if they're traded, they're prepared to succeed somewhere else.
I just remember that Theo used to mention it a lot on the also day about in 2011, where they had Mookie Betts down for like 12th, 13th rounder, because he was so small and he had throwing problems and all the rest, and ended up taking him, what, 5th round because of those, that whatever test it was.
That was not the personality test. That was a hand-eye coordination program that we have called Neuro Scouting. It's essentially a video game that we take into every hitter that we want to draft has to play this video game on a laptop. We'll bring it into a home. If it's a college program, we'll take it into a dorm room. And it's actually an interesting glimpse at the player's personality. Some kids that will just tap the bar, not even look. They're not paying attention. Like, this kid doesn't want to compete. The kids who want to compete, they want to know how they scored, how that kid down in Texas scored. And so Mookie was a slightly built kid. Hard to see because that year the weather was just terrible. He got hurt, he rolled his ankle, and honestly, there was only one other team that was really on him. It was the Kansas City Royals. They knew that we were on him. We knew that they were on him. They had some scout hiding up in the tree while we were there watching Mookie, and his hand-eye coordination on that test was off the charts. We'd never seen anything like it.
Hey Gus, can I just make sure as head of school that you are not saying to these boys, play more video games and less
Yeah, I think video games is a little misleading. I mean, this is a program built by neuroscientists that got their PhDs. You think like the
I'm
smartest
trying to
people
simplify it so they're not overwhelmed by it.
the smartest people in baseball.
If you start talking about a neuroscientist coming into their home, the parents are going to want no part of it. So.
But that was interesting when these guys first started, the obstacle of having 2 neuroscientists come in to your player development complex and talk to you about how this program is going to not only be able to evaluate good hitters but also help develop good hitters. And there was a lot of skepticism, but I think that was 10 years ago, and they've done pretty well.
Matt, what was the most unusual thing you were asked to go through?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's different for pitchers, but I mean, there were times where I took 2.5 hour, 3 hour tests, just like checking off personality stuff like, do you want a cat or a dog? Stuff like that, like just stuff that makes no sense. But I'm trying to think of something. Yeah, that was pretty much it. I think it's much worse for the hitters, but.
Yes.
One of the topics running around is analytics. Do you love them? Do you hate them? Do you use all of them? What's your experience with this topic?
One thing that has happened in the last, 5 to 7 years is analytics have gone from the front office to coaching. They're used tremendously in coaching, pitch athletics and all those things. I mean, with hitting, it's part of everything. There's so much there's so much information. Almost every team has one or two guys who were players, but have great analytical skills. I mean, Brian Bannister with the Red Sox, Danny Herron with Arizona, people like that. It's really interesting. I mean, I think all of you probably have experienced it, but it's a totally different game and evaluation and coaching tool than it ever was before. Old timers, I mean, I get it. We don't want to hear about it, but unfortunately, it's the real world. And I mean, I'd be interested in any of the experiences that you guys have had with them.
It's a huge part of our process. We lean heavily on our scouts. However, we're also taking input from our analytics department. And I'll say industry-wide, the analytics departments are growing at a really fast pace. We lost out. We tried to hire a guy who just ended up with another club. They gave him $300,000 to become an analyst. So it's becoming extremely competitive. I think eventually in the next, my guess is 3 years, that playing field will level off and everyone will have a strong analytics department. I know the Tigers added about 13 members to their analytics department that really didn't exist 2 years ago.
When Brad Oswald first got there to be mayor, he, of course, had created a whole system in Los Angeles himself.
Sure.
But he actually hired 2 graduate students. That was their analytics department.
Wow. And so I think what's going to happen is that playing field will level in the next few years. And then what's the next? We're going to try to find what's the next competitive edge. So maybe it's going out and getting the best scouts. Maybe it's the best coaches. But the hard part is you can evaluate your scouts. You can study their track records. But you don't know how good the other team's scouts are because you don't get to see their work. So that's the challenge.
I think too on the analytics, the history of the game, people have been going to games for years and looking at a stat sheet, okay, and saying, geez, this guy's hitting for power, this guy's striking guys out. I think what's happening is it's being used a little bit more to be a separator. And for us, as an amateur scout, making sure that I'm not missing somebody. If there's a guy that's striking out a ton of guys and not walking too many, I need to be aware of that guy. In the past, maybe 15 years ago, you'd kind of just go by the tools, the velocity, the breaking ball. And now it's putting more of the pieces of the puzzle together. And I think today's players, and you could talk about it, Jason, is they don't want to just know the how to do something. They want to know the why. Okay, and that why is what analytics is providing. We just picked up a guy from Boston College in a trade named Mike King from the Marlins. And Mike already wants to know how our analytics department works and how he can tailor what his preparation is to the numbers, how it can make them better. So it's interesting.
Yeah, in Cleveland, we had a whole analytic department. It's pretty intense, and like Pete said, it's probably for about 5 or 7 years. I've only been on the big league coaching staff for 3 years, but it was already pretty involved. It basically will it's not like proof, but for a player, if he's confused about certain things, actually put it this way, if somebody sees a guy that has a good four-seam fastball that has ride to it, but it's only like low 90s, which isn't like pure velocity, guys might question and wonder why guys are swinging and missing that fastball right down the middle. With the naked eye, a lot of people can see it and say he's got good ride, you know, you call it ride through the zone, or it has good carry through the zone, it has some life to it. You hear all those terms. Well, now this is in numbers, has defined the terms with spin rates and things like that. How much the velocity has dropped. You know, I know everyone's seen the gun readings at a stadium. I don't think it was this way years ago, but we looked at some information, and you can have two guys that throw 94 miles an hour out of the hand, and one of the guys loses more velocity along the way than the other guy. Now, some might say, well, how does that guy that throws 94 just get hit so hard? Well, it might have something to do with that. So basically, there's just a lot of information that you can dig into. Don't get me wrong, there are players in the big leagues that they want nothing to do with it. They don't want to hear it. They want nothing to do with it. There's just as many, though, that want enough. And again, it's all individuals. For what we had in Cleveland, you know, Andrew Miller, hey, throw your slider. That might be a good idea. I mean, he's got probably the best slider in baseball. So, you know, you don't really need a whole lot of information, but in spring training, he was dealing with something where he's a little bit off mechanically. And we started looking at things, and I don't know if you heard, but Peter mentioned this thing, TrackMan. You can see the degree, angles of the hand and everything at release. So there's just a ton of information that you can see. It might be something that you already saw with your naked eye. You have everyone watching, and you might say to the other pitching coaches and say, does it look like he dropped down right there a little bit? Yeah, I noticed the other day in the game too. You can go look, and there it is, there's proof. It's literally what you just saw. But I just think in the end, it's for a lot of guys, it's how you take all that information, and you can take it on your own, know what you're working on, what you need to deal with, and not let the player know. But if you're having a conversation later on, a few weeks later or 10 days later, and you can say, here, you know what, I was actually digging up something. The thing we were talking about the other day, here, look at this. We actually dug this up, and you know, see, look, and then they actually buy into it a little bit more because you're actually showing them some quote unquote some proof to, you know, what you've been seeing.
One of the most interesting things, this was said to me about 10 days ago by Garrett Cole, because Garrett still has the second highest average velocity of any starting pitcher in baseball at 96.5. But they started last year, they hit 31 home runs off him and all these different things about pull rates and so forth. And he said, well, it taught me a lot. He said, because analytics should be inspirational. You should take analytics and be inspired to develop whatever you have to do to combat. You know, he said, for instance, pull rate, when he was talking about his changeup and so forth. I'd never heard inspirational use with analytics, and I found it interesting. But I also, in the last week, Buck Showalter was talking to me about still having people who hear what hitters say about pitchers. And he was talking about some guy in spring training that, and the Orioles were always looking for any pitcher that can actually walk out to the mound. But one of their scouts was in town, and they were watching this spring training game, and said, God, this guy, all the hitters were coming back and said, we can't see the ball. He was throwing like, he was left-handed, throwing 88 to 90, and you know, it was, people upstairs probably didn't think it was anything but a joke, but Buck said, you know, when hitters are telling you, and some of the Orioles have a lot of really good hitters, when they're saying, we can't see the ball, it was worth, he said, well, Arthur, we claimed him on waivers, it turned out to be pretty good. And there's so many different ways to appreciate and attempt to evaluate talent. It's not just numbers alone. I mean, it's if it were just numbers alone, the Houston Astros wouldn't be the world champions. Yes.
Like Japanese guys in the major leagues right now, like Darvish, Ohtani, now Tanaka, they're all like superstars in high school, like national stage. So does that bring any scouting attention to the high school baseball scene in Japan?
I saw Tanaka his first time pitching in the United States. It was at Doubleday Field in Cooperstown. It was against a group of Northeast kids put together by Ray Fagnet, and it was a Japanese national team. And there was a much more high-profile kid on that team, on the Japanese team, than Tanaka. And Tanaka pitched the second game of this doubleheader. And I thought it was fascinating, you know, just to see how they did things differently. Now on the U.S. team was Matt Harvey and Rick Porcello and a guy named Devin Mesoraco who's been up with the Reds. Pretty good group of kids. For me, it was a great day. But yeah, I think the thing that probably, Matt, came into focus for you when you signed your contract and you went out is, and we talked a little bit earlier, that question earlier, this is a world game we're talking about, you know? And I know the Colorado Rockies a couple of years ago, Billy Schmidt was telling the story, they sent a guy to cover the Little League World Series because the signing deadline for international players is much younger, 16, right? So they wanted to get the jump on these young guys coming up. I said, wow, that's an interesting way of doing it. So, yeah, they get looks.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems to get, you know, because it's so competitive, it seems to get earlier and earlier that teams are, you know, on a guy. So, you know, I'll hear rumors about our scouts going out and seeing a guy that's class of 2020. And what that means is he's not going to be eligible to sign, meaning 16, until 2020. So, you know, do the math. You're talking about 13, 14-year-old kids that our scouts are going out and seeing on a regular basis. And so, and I think, I don't remember how old Tozawa was, but I know Tozawa was signed before he went pro in Japan. And so, you know, there are players that if they're good enough, you know, at a young enough age in Japan, they will get attention. I don't think the Japanese teams like that very much.
No, they don't.
But the Japanese professional teams.
But Taz was in the middle of nowhere up in the mountains, and our scout now with Duncan, John Diebel, went through a monsoon of a storm and went all the way up to the top of the mountain just to find this kid and saw him pitch, got video, sent it immediately to, I think it was Craig Shipley. It's like, we've got to sign this kid. And just stumbled into him, really. He had the name, but he didn't know what he was walking into until he saw him that day.
I was wondering, I really connected to what you were saying about just like the difference between Boston and the relationship with the Red Sox. And growing up, I feel like, you know, like we were just like hanging on every pitch. And I felt like last season for the first time, like they're, not for the first time, but that like almost the relationship felt a little bit fractured between the city and the Red Sox. And if you feel like there needs to be any kind of like reparative work to be done. Not that there was like this major thing that happened, but I just felt like some of the like lifelong fans just were a little discouraged with some of the players and maybe some of the things that were happening.
You think that that's something that
I've been asked that question. I've had a number of people tell me, honestly, I'm baffled by it. I think it stems from maybe one incident, maybe two incidents, one which was fan-related, another which was player-related with Dennis Eckersley. And I've had people tell me that just the Red Sox aren't likable. And it just stuns me because I've also had people, wide range of ages, different generations, who've told me how much they love the energy on our club and the dance that they take after. I know 20 years ago people would have hated that. But we have one of the more diverse clubhouses you could have. I think it represents all that is good in baseball. So I've actually been taken back by that. And I think what will change that likability is the fact that the Yankees are loading up. And that maybe we're going to be an underdog this year. And I don't think it's right, but all of a sudden we're likable again. So honestly, I can't explain it. Other than Peter, you can speak to it. You're in the
I thought it was really odd, just because, I mean, the first year I covered the Red Sox was 1972, so I have been around for a while. I thought it was one of the more likable teams, and I found this fascinating is in the Houston series, the 2 games in Boston, which I thought were, I mean, every moment of those games was thrilling. But so Houston wins the final game, the 4th game, and there was a point in there during that game. Matter of fact, I said to Sam, "This is incredible, Sam. I mean, we have Chris Sale and Justin Verlander are out there pitching in relief. I mean, two of the greatest modern pitchers are pitching in relief, not to get a record or not for their own to make more money or anything that goes on their Hall of Fame resume. It's just to try to for the Astros to get the series over, for the Red Sox to extend it another day. And so when I got down to the Houston clubhouse, Justin Verlander, who I've known very well from going back to his college days, he was right inside the door, and he grabbed me and he said, "How great!" I mean, I was out there on the mound. I was walking out to the mound between innings, and I was like, "This is so incredible." Sale and I are matching up. We're trying to beat each other with nothing but the love of the game at stake. And he said, the passion of the Red Sox and the passion of the Astros, who were a very passionate team, especially with George Springer as their leader, was amazing. And I thought later, a couple of days later, because somebody said to me, "Oh, the Red Sox are boring." And I thought, the Houston Astros are one of the most exciting teams right now in the game. And they were all marveling at the Red Sox and the energy and the competitiveness of that series. Once the pitching got straightened away and they got back to Fenway, I mean, those games were absolutely incredible.
You watch Devers out there, he's smiling like he's a 12-year-old. And you see when every inning ends, I've never seen this before, and Duncan was there, and you'd see Jackie throw a long pass to Mookie as they're running back into the dugout. Mookie will catch it. You don't see that. I mean, they're having fun. And I can just say, I know a lot of these players, I'm around them mostly during spring training. Once the season starts, we're not around them as often. They're good people. They're good kids, come from good families. Some of the nicer guys you'll find. So that likability thing, it bothers me, actually.
It'll be interesting to see if that changes with Alex Cora and a different coaching staff. Not to say that the previous coaching staff did anything to cause that, but sometimes a shakeup, like that, because I agree with Gus. Those kids, I mean, they are pretty much kids that the Red Sox are rolling out there every day are some of the more likable guys that I've been around. And I think if their personalities, get a chance to kind of come out and flourish, they will be a likable team for sure.
I mean, your team, the Dodgers, are a great example. Dave Roberts comes in, and that his personality, to me, is I don't think I'm out of line saying it's overwhelming, because he's such a great person, and he's so trusted. I mean, it's something Mark Shapiro and I have talked about and so studied in different books about leadership, but the first tenet of leadership is authenticity. And that's what Dave has. And I think that's what Alex has. And I think that's why the Yankees have Aaron Boone. That authenticity is tremendously important. And I think players today are more aware of it. And I don't really know why, unless society changes and it's not, you're going to do this because I told you this. I mean, it's not Gene Mark saying you're going to do this because I said you're going to do it. You have to get somebody to the old military line about the leadership is getting people to do something they really don't want to do, but you want them to. Yes.
So we have 3 people here who were eliminated by the Astros in the postseason this year.
Can we stop talking about the Astros? What? 2017 is done.
It's done, right?
So my question is, how much of when you guys are looking back after the season, how much are you like, maybe the Astros had something that was better than us? How much of it is it's a 5-game series, it's a 7-game series, someone hangs a breaking ball, someone leaves a pitcher in too long? How much of it are you looking at? Yeah, this is a short series, we just got unlucky. And how much of this is like maybe they had something that we were missing, maybe they had better, maybe they had Charlie Warren just hiding away or something. How much are we looking at after the season like that?
I can say for us, the World Series ended, and I was in the Dominican Republic for a few weeks afterwards, and we talked about every one of those games, and every moment, and analyzing it. If this had happened differently, if that had happened differently, but I think in some ways too, after being a part of the 2013 Red Sox team, there's some kind of a quality to those teams when they have something to rally around, like in 2013 the Red Sox had, and this year the Astros had. And it feels funny talking about it in an official way, like up on a stage, but sometimes I really do believe that they just had something special and it was their year. And sure, if Kenley Jansen doesn't give up a home run in the top of the 8th inning of Game 2, maybe the Dodgers win the World Series. I don't know, but the Astros definitely had something special. I think we can all agree to that.
Oh, and the personality of that team, they had everything rolling. I mean, they were really hot. They went through different stages during the season, but there was that sort of wide-eyed. I think A.J. Hinch, the manager, did a great job understanding that team completely revolves around George Springer. People, and this comes to certain analytics guys go, oh, you can't bat him lead up. Yeah, he's the guy who wants to strut out there and lead it, and everybody knows it. I mean, even though he didn't have a great junior year at UConn when he was their #1 pick, he was the guy that when he walked out in the field, everybody knew that this is George's game, and the rest of you can follow. And the Astros had some guys like that. I mean, Bregman is one of the greatest characters, right down to all the different levels of his family. I mean, his grandfather was Hubert Humphrey's campaign manager in 1968. I found that pretty interesting.
We actually drafted Bregman out of high school, and so I wish we signed him.
Swihart's best friend?
Yeah, he was best friends with Swihart, so hopefully his success will rub off on Blake this winter, and we can get a successful Blake Swihart this year.
I've got to say to your question, though, that was the playoffs, the World Series, those games were fun to watch, I thought, just from a fan standpoint. I mean, it was enjoyable. God, if we can have that every year, that'd be outstanding.
One of the things that was fun from a Dodger standpoint was being reminded by Cody Bellinger that the now minor league third baseman, but then high school teammate of Cody Bellinger, who ended up playing for MIT last year, hit 13 home runs, and Bellinger hit 1 in high school. So
wow.
It shows MIT has better baseball. Yes.
Oh, all right. You guys talked earlier about like Verlander and Sale coming out of the bullpen, and I was just wondering because I've listened to guys like Brian Kennedy, Bill James, and like those the statisticians talk about this term like bullpenning, and how I'm wondering if you guys think that will happen moving forward, like how much time that will take, or do you think that won't work, like started pitching less and relievers?
I think it'll be hard to sustain throughout the course of a marathon of a season. It's fine in the postseason, it works, but with the full season, that's tough to sustain, and that's why you need someone like a success. The good Rick Porcello at Cy Young year to eat all those innings. Stephen Wright may not wow you with stuff, but he eats a ton of innings, and that's huge.
It's hard for relievers to maintain. Back in the 80s when Sparky Anderson was managing the Tigers, and he would just abuse relievers. Well, always used to joke, if a guy has a great year for the Tigers with Sparky Anderson, don't trade for him because he'll be on the disabled list by May. But it's hard. I mean, that year that Andrew Miller had, when it was so brilliant 2 years ago, I mean, if you take it over a 162 game season, he would have thrown 340 innings and he would now be retired.
Yeah, and in the postseason of 2016, people talked about how like the game's changing. You know, Andrew Miller is coming in the 5th inning or 6th inning of a game, and you know, I think we're going to see this, you know, from now on. And I think it was overstated, you know, due to the fact that it's not sustainable during a long season. And Kenley Jansen's not even in the bullpen in the 5th inning; he's in the clubhouse. You know, so over the course of a year, it just doesn't work that way. It would be great if you could have your best pitchers throwing in the highest leverage situations, but realistically, it just doesn't work out.
As far as drafting kids, like if the Red Sox are going to draft somebody from, let's say, New England, is that a good thing? Like, do you like somebody who's kind of been through it and kind of lived it and like to make up like a Northeast kid? Or does it kind of hurt them where maybe there's more pressure because they're going to be with the Red Sox? You know, is that a good thing or a bad thing? The same thing with the Yankees.
You know, I can talk just about the Yankee part of it. You know, I know we're trying to get the best players, okay? So it doesn't matter if they're from Andover, Mass. Or Los Angeles. You know, it's how we evaluate them, how we see them against good competition, the tools they have, the baseball skills, the performance history, all melded into, and then the makeup, you know. And
so the makeup part doesn't really, like for the Yankees, the makeup of a Northeast kid it's really individual, like specific to an individual more than it is you see to like an area of the country.
You know, if a kid has to get up at 6 a.m. to get his lifting in and it's 20 degrees out, you know, that shows some toughness to him. But there may be a kid in California who's working his tail off too, you know. And I think it helps the kids in New England. You know, again, the multi-sport guys in particular who compete in different things, you know, that's an advantage to them. But at the end of the day, you know, it's about finding the best players. But I think what you're talking about speaks to the intangibles, you know. And yeah, it's so hard for a kid, and Matt's going through this now, to sign out of high school and go right into professional baseball. So they're going to have a lot of intangibles, you know, that are positive. You know, the ability to deal with failure, the ability to live away from home for the first time, some of them. You know, the ability to take care of themselves, and then the ability to take ownership of their career. You know, that was probably a big thing for you, right, starting out and getting into it. I think it's, you know, a big deal when guys have all those things lined up, but it doesn't matter where they come from.
I just see guys like Northeast guys, I think of right off the top of my head, are like Carlton Fisk and Chris Carpenter. You know what I'm saying? As far as like their makeup and stuff like that. I mean, kind of over the top bulldog type competitors. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I just wouldn't see Carpenter over there, so that's for sure. You know, for a minute. But,
well, you know, I'll take a guy that you guys would all know, Mike Trout. Okay, great high school basketball player in the state of New Jersey. His father had played professionally. He played for a travel team called the Tri-State Arsenal. There were different people that wanted him to play on bigger teams or more select teams, and he wanted to stick with those guys that he had grown up with. And he never acted like he had arrived. He had this blue-collar, Millville, New Jersey side to him that was really good. It was very simple for him, you know. It didn't matter if he was playing in front of a huge crowd of scouts or nobody in the stands. He was the same guy, you know, and I think that came from his upbringing, you know. And I think it probably hurt him maybe with some clubs as a right-handed hitting high school outfielder from New Jersey, you know, and people probably look the other way. You know, how many of those guys play in the big leagues? But you know, it's like how many kids from Kalamazoo, Michigan play in the big leagues. You know, we got Derek Jeter. So, you know, you never know.
Chris Carpenter's story. He was an incredible hockey player. Would have been a #1 pick in hockey because he was, he was like 6'5", 6'6" defenseman. But the guy who was the scouting director in Toronto, Tim Wilkin, went to a game up in northern New Hampshire watching, what was he, Manchester Memorial play against another high school, Trinity, against somebody else. And Wilkins said, I loved it. He said, I saw this guy. He knocked some guy out on the other team, and he checked him. The guy was skating over the line, good skater, but he knocked him out with a check. It was Ben Charrington. Yes.
This question is for Gus or anybody on the panel. Alex Cora being bilingual, do you think that will be helpful to some of the players? Someone like Raphael Devers, I'm not sure if he does speak English, or the communication coming directly from the coach, the manager, versus through an interpreter or one of the other players. I mean, I don't know what his level, but him being bilingual, do you think that would be helpful?
Absolutely. I think it makes a huge difference. And it's not just the fact that he's bilingual, it's his personality. He can reach all kinds of people, make them feel like they're part of it. He's just got that kind of personality that's very inviting. And you can just tell that he cares about you. And I think that'll go a long way especially with our younger players. It's hard when they first come up to Boston. Most of them, even Pedroia, when they first come up to Boston, they're going to scuffle. And I remember, Tito will laugh about it. They're like best friends now. But when he first came up, he couldn't stand Pedroia. And now they're like best of friends. So, the ability to reach the player, yes, the language will help. But we bring in coaches from all walks of life that can, our AA manager, Carlos Febles, is now going to be our third base coach. He's come up all the way through the system with Devers, so that relationship will go a long way as well.
Does he speak any English?
Yeah, no, all our kids. I mean, Duncan was heavily involved in that when he was with the Red Sox, where we work hard to help with the assimilation. They're required to go to English classes all the way through our system. Duncan can speak more to that.
Yeah, I mean, the Red Sox and probably Cleveland and a couple others were some of the first teams to really, place a lot of focus on the education of the players from Latin America, not just in learning English, but in other ways too. But actually, Major League Baseball now mandates it at the academies in the Dominican Republic and throughout the minor league system, basically acknowledging the fact that we get these players at 16 and 17 years old, and we really owe it to them and to their families to educate them to the extent that we can while they're in our system. So yeah, Devers, I'm sure he's picked some up. He's a shy guy naturally, so he may not be speaking to the media, giving press conferences in English, but they do the best they can. And I think to your original question, as far as the impact that Alex Cora being able to speak to both Spanish speakers and English speakers in their native language, I don't think you can overstate the importance of that, because what I've seen is that personalities really come out in a different way when you're speaking in your native language. And so if 100% of the players in that clubhouse now can speak to the manager in their native language, it makes a big difference in how comfortable they feel.
It's very different than 20, 30 years ago when clubhouses it was almost like, the way some cities like Boston are structured, almost like ethnic neighborhoods, 4 lockers here, 5 lockers there, 3 lockers there, all basically from the same backgrounds. And it was unintentional segregation, but it definitely existed. It was a very different, you go to spring training and when the Red Sox train in Winter Haven, Florida, I mean, the spacious Holiday Inn in Winter Haven would be completely, all the minor league Latin players would be in one area. It was a totally different thing. And I often have wondered how many players baseball lost because they didn't do the social assimilation.
And we'll send our domestic player, I was just going to say, after the draft, we send our recent draftees, the domestic players, down to the Dominican to live with them, to give them a taste of what it's like. They live in our academy. Duncan's been part of the program, and they'll do some community service down there. And we've had a few kids who balk at the idea, but the kids that do go down, they love it. And I think the Latin players appreciate the fact that our kids up here are willing to leave their comfort zone and take it all in with them down in their home.
We did that for the first time this year. It was 12 of us. We went down from October 15th to the 29th. We went for 2 weeks.
Oh, nice.
And it was a pretty cool experience. So, yeah.
Did you really learn how tough it is to come from where they came from?
It was definitely an experience. We were in the academy, which, I mean, the D-backs academy is probably top 2 worst. We ate Burger King for every meal, 2 meals a day. And then we were probably about a 20-foot by 20-foot room, 6 bunk beds, 12 guys, no hot water, 1 bathroom, can't drink the water. It was definitely tough. It kind of opens your eyes to, like, one thing that, like, they come always, like, the Latin guys always do, like, when they're coming to the States, is they take, like, 3 plates full of food and they leave us with nothing. And it's kind of like, what are you doing? But then when you go there, you kind of understand, like, why they're doing it, you know what I mean? So it kind of opened my eyes a bit.
Matt, I was curious, Peter talked about the segregation that used to exist, and unfortunately I still see it. It's not unnatural, I don't think. I mean, I think to some extent, like, you're gonna go with the players that you're comfortable with, and it's not a bad thing. But what was the environment like in Arizona this summer when you got there?
I mean, I thought it was actually really, really good. It was definitely better than I thought. I mean, we had a lot of Latin guys that were, like, very happy all the time. Very just like, our facility is obviously really nice down there. They were happy to be there. So I mean, like, I do my best to try to just, like, talk to them. I took Spanish 3 in high school, so I do my best. But yeah, no, they're all my buddies. There's this one kid. He's from Venezuela. He doesn't speak a lick English, and every day, like, probably we had to be at the field at 1. He would come to me at like 10 a.m. and he would just go bang bang, and I would know that means take him to the Bank of America to get his $25, $30 for the day. So, but so yeah, it's definitely better than I expected.
What do you guys think is the most important thing that separates a regular minor league player from a guy that can excel in the big leagues?
It starts with
We have no idea.
It starts with the ability, the talent, the tools. I mean, they really, when you see that, they jump out at you. As long as he has the intangibles to deal with the inevitable failures that he's going to face. I think Matt can speak to this. Like, where were you supposed to go to school?
Elon University.
Elon University. So he turned down an opportunity to go play at Elon, right? So he goes to Arizona, gets to play. Now he's lucky in Arizona. They now play night games, right?
Yeah.
So, but in Florida, because the rain always arrives around 4 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon, you can't take batting practice. So our games are at 10 a.m. typically, sometimes at 1 or noon, right? So you're a high school kid, turned down an opportunity to play at Elon in front of fans, right? Now you're in Fort Myers, Florida, playing at noon in front of nobody, and it's 125 degrees. So those kind of things, like the intangibles there that he has, obviously he had the maturity to make the decision that I can handle this, but if you can't cut that, a lot of kids just quit then and there.
You gotta love baseball. You really gotta love baseball. So.
But so to answer your question, the main thing is the tools that they carry, because there are some players with plenty of talent that are terrible human beings, but they still make the big leagues because they're talented.
I think another thing to look at is probably mental toughness. Someone had asked me years ago, what do you think is the toughest jump? What level? A ball to double A to triple A? And it's like, no, it's the big leagues. For one, because of the talent. You have less like redos in the big leagues. You make more mistakes out over the plate in the big leagues, they're gonna get hit harder. The game is the same, and there's actually, you can go watch, even close to here, you can go to Manchester and watch a AA game. You'll see kids with better skill sets, maybe, than some guys in the big leagues, but they're just not as consistent. You know, you'll see guys throwing harder, like, wow, he throws hard, but it's more than that. And, you know, Matt just got into pro ball now, and I'm sure leading up to now, you probably dominated, like in high school, if I had to guess. It's pretty simple equation. I don't know how much he pitched last year in rookie ball.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
Okay, so he probably did well there. It's gonna be, so everyone where he's at right now really hasn't probably failed, or what his definition of failure might be like, you know, I only went 7 innings, I only struck out 12. You know, that might be failure for him right now. You know, that's kind of the evolution of like a younger pitcher. You know, what you think is failure isn't really, and then when it does hit, you have like, you know, 2-3 starts in a row where you know, just not good, and then you start doubting yourself. You know, here's a story, this might come off a little bit pompous, but so be it, it kind of applies to this. My rookie year in the big leagues, if I ever had a bad start, I would give them like my shoes or the glove like one more chance. So if I had 2 bad starts in a row, I'd get rid of them and wear new cleats. That was my definition of, you know, wow, that was really bad. I, you know, only went, you know, 6 innings that day. And then, of course, after that, things fell apart. But I was changing shoes a lot like 2 years later. So to answer your question, mental toughness definitely applies. And the intangibles, you know, it's circling back to some of the analytic talk. It's a numbers-based game. You know, guys are being paid because of numbers. You know, the score is decided because of numbers. But in the end, there's, you know, in equations and how things fit, there's certain things you can't put a number on. You can't. And someone had asked about the draft earlier. Well, if you could figure that out, like, wow, forget it. You'd be the best team ever. But there's certain things you just can't put a nomination on it and say, like, okay, that's a 5, that'll fit into our equation. It doesn't. Mental toughness, you know. You can see a guy that has mound presence. Is it real? You know, you might, I don't know, sometimes maybe, I've never scouted, but maybe you go in and you kind of get deep because that kid knows the scout's there, and all of a sudden, you know, and then you see him over the course of time and be like, oh, well, that was kind of just fake, that mound presence he had. Because I saw it when things were going good. What about when he wasn't going good? Is he the same kid when things are going bad? So there's different things but I think in the end, as I'm rambling, the mental toughness is a big, big part, because, you know, if you didn't fail, you probably didn't play long enough. You know, that's what was told to me when I was younger, and it's true.
Jason, I mean, you dealt with Corey Kluber. Here's a guy that was a low draft choice. He got traded to the Indians in a minor league deal. He was, I think, 13 games under 500, and had already made like 100 starts in the minor leagues. And now he's the best pitcher in the American League. Can you talk a little bit about his makeup and what drives him?
Klub is a beyond methodical person. What you see on the mound, every single step, every mannerism he does that when he plays golf, everything is calculated. His side days are the same. He didn't work any harder to quote unquote turn things around. He developed a 2-seam. He never doubted himself. But like you said, there were times, and this is when I was traveling around watching some of our minor league guys, and he was one of them. And I'd watch, and you'd see the stuff. He kind of toyed around at one point with almost too many different pitches at that time. And kind of zeroed it in and came up with a 2-seam. But he's just really thoughtful in everything he does. His routines are off the charts, as well as our closer, Cody Allen. I actually spoke to him today. I actually asked if they could videotape his catch game, Cody Allen's, because it's perfect. He gets everything out of it and everything he does. I think in the end, you hear all the catchphrases, has great work ethic, but this is real. Like, you can see it. It's not just, he's not just doing it for you to see it. He's doing it because he knows that it's going to make him better. And he's local here now because his wife grew up in Winchester, and now he lives here. And he used to travel here in the off season to work out and get a program, but he's an animal. He is nicknamed the Cluebot, which he doesn't like, by the way, but because he doesn't think he's that way. But if you golf with him, oh gosh, just swing already. He takes forever to do everything. You see him on the mound. He gets up, he does that, he goes like this, he's here, his posture's perfect. Everything is calculated and thought out, and it's always been that way. So I'm not sure what that one thing. I do think the two-seamer had a lot to do with it. And it's just, you listen to hitters and, they don't know if it's going to do that or do that. Like, by the time it gets up to the plate, so he's tough to pick up. And obviously, with another Cy Young, he's doing a great job.
The biggest thing that I see is the consistency. Because a lot of these guys I'll see when they're, 17, 18 years old, and then you track their progress up to the big leagues. And, we're talking about George Springer earlier. And, Springer, when he was in high school, he was a really good athlete who was super aggressive, and he was ultra confident, but he had a huge swing, and he'd swing and miss a lot. And then he got to UConn, and it was the same type of guy, but all of a sudden he started to get stronger. He got stronger, and he played in the Cape League. He played with Team USA. He started to figure some things out. His junior year, he got off to a horrible start, okay? But he didn't let that affect the end of the season for him, He finished off strong, and to see him as a major leaguer now is, you see a guy that's just more consistent. But back when he was that age, he showed us glimpses of what he could do. It's not like he all of a sudden became George Springer, the big leaguer in the World Series. He could hit the ball really far. He was a great athlete. He was super aggressive. And it's getting all those tools and talents and making them consistent. That, to me, is the difference in a big league.
It's been a slow offseason with free agent signings by most accounts. A lot of big names, Arrieta, Darvish, Katie Martinez still out there. Is that an indication that owners are starting to get a little skittish about long-term deals? Is there some difference in the calculation of free agent value? Just curious what you guys think about the slow offseason so far.
Well, I think it's a combination. I think we've all studied this. I think there was a very conscious effort from the commissioner's office on down to say, don't jump out there. Because if you get 1, 2, 3 teams that jump out early, the whole market moves with it. And it develops slowly. But part of that is the fact that Scott Boras has 4, 5, 6 of the best free agents. And Scott likes to take things down to the last moment. And he does seek maximum contracts, and that takes some time. I mean, people say to me, "What's wrong with the Reds? So why don't they just get J.D. Martinez?" Well, I wouldn't be giving a DH 7 years, especially with the evolution of the DH becoming so less important than it used to be. And the pitchers, I mean, there's not a Harper in there. There's not a Machado in there. It's just a lot of factors that have come together. And I also think that there's less of a pressing need to compete. The Red Sox and the Yankees compete. They certainly do. And I actually thought it was admirable that the Red Sox didn't just start jumping off buildings when the Yankees got Giancarlo Stanton. I mean, that was a combination of terrible new management in Miami, and the fact that Giancarlo, most situations, owners have control over the players. Giancarlo had control over his situation, so that the owners had to come to him. So it was very different. He had a choice of where he wanted to go. He didn't want to go to St. Louis. He didn't want to go a couple of other places. So the Dodgers weren't going to do it, which is where he wanted to go. So that was fine. But that's held things up. And I think now I think you're going to see some significant free agents sign after spring training begins. And that's not entirely, that's not completely unusual, but it is by far the slowest year. But the difference is you have so many teams that are basically saying we're not going to compete. And we were talking about this at dinner. I mean, I look at the American League. Well, let's see. Houston, Boston, New York, Cleveland. I don't know who the fifth team in the playoffs will be. We already know 4 of them. I mean, we think we do. And the National League is 3 out of the 5. And when revenue sharing started because of the negotiations in 2002, Bud Selig had said before the negotiations began, the problem with the game is that 20 to 30 teams know when they go to spring training they don't have a chance to play in the playoffs. We've kind of returned to that now. And I don't know how it gets fixed, but I think that's another pressure. It'll be interesting to see next year, except that, I mean, if Arenado, Machado, Harper, they're going to get a great deal of money, but if the Dodgers, the Red Sox, and the Yankees aren't out there offering it to them, it may be just a slow market.
If you guys could talk a little bit about the impact of managers. We got 2 new managers coming in, and Tito Francona has been in Cleveland for a while now. If you could just talk a little bit about the impact that a manager has had, you think will have, and why Boone and why Cora were good fits for the teams that they're going to. And how is it that, what was there about Tito Francona that turned that team around just like he seemed to turn this team around?
I think with Tito back, are you referring to the Cleveland Tito or the Boston?
I'm referring to the Cleveland Tito, although he turned the Boston situation around too.
I think Tito, just players believed in Tito. They knew that he had their backs. He was masterful with dealing with the media. I don't think it's as important in Cleveland as it is in Boston. But he was able to deflect attention away from players in Boston. I can't speak to the Cleveland experience. And so I think that would he go down as one of the greatest game tacticians ever? Maybe not. He's a good one. But it was how he could relate to players and how he could dance with the media. Because I think, I used to talk to John Farrell about it. Belichick has to do it once a week. John has to do it, or had to do it, every day. And after nothing happened at spring training, we were doing pitchers and catchers, covering bases, and he still has to do a press conference every day, answering the same questions. So that it's a real challenge in Boston, and Jason can speak to the Tito in Cleveland.
Yeah, Cleveland's media is not Boston's. I think any manager, and especially now going back to analytics again, I think the game is kind of already scripted a little bit, especially if you have certain guys that are available that night out of the pen. You have a lead, it's this score, that, Miller's coming in the 7th with, a 2-run lead. I think it's about, you're literally managing personalities, which you have to do as a coach too, but the manager's in charge. And from what I witnessed every day, dancing with the media is a good description. You have to handle the media. That's, because they're gonna write about it every day, and you have to talk to them every day. Some players, they can pout and be like, I'm not talking to the media today, and take off. Well, the manager can't do that. But I think in the end, it's just about, it's managing different people and their personalities, because, you know, you have, think about it, you have a 25-man roster. Yeah, they're all baseball players, but they are not all the same. There are some similarities, but or they wouldn't have got to where they were in the first place. But personality-wise, there's a lot of differences, and you need to be able to, you know, talk with them, and they need to know that, you know, you're in it with them. So just managing the personalities is the biggest key, I think.
It's interesting how with Alex Cora and also Gabe Kapler getting hired with the Phillies, people talked about their experience, you know, on TV, you know, being part of the media as a benefit to now being in that role, which I also think, you know, that never probably happened before. You know, that on your resume, Gabe Kapler can list that he used to work for Fox, and now he's a manager of the Phillies, and same with Cora. So I think it just highlights that importance of, you know, being comfortable in front of a camera.
Certainly helped Joe Torre.
Who's that?
It certainly helped Joe Torre.
Joe Torre, yeah.
Because his work in the media, he had managed the Mets, gotten fired, managed the Braves, got fired, managed the Cardinals, where I thought he did a great job, and got fired. But he spent 3 or 4 years in television, and doing the Angels games and doing national games, and his ability to understand, and he was one of the first people who did it. Joe Madden does it brilliantly. When he gives his pre and post game press conference, he's not answering the media's questions. He's talking to the players. He's asked questions, but it all goes to the players. And Joe figured that out early on, and I was fortunate. He was the second partner I had in television, he used to say, you know, I think if I ever get another chance, I think I really understand it now, how to deal with the players, how to combine media, players, and obviously the record in New York speaks for itself.
If the Red Sox could turn the clock back, do you think they would have handled the Eckersley Price dust up a little differently?
I don't know. I mean, it's a far more complex issue than was painted in the media. I happen to believe that when you're in the media, and I was taught this right away when I started by a manager named Eddie Casco, who was great to me. I mean, I was 23 years old and the youngest writer on the beat by 25 years. And he said, look, you're going to be critical of a player, you better beat it the next day. And you got to face it. And players will have no problem with you if they know you're not afraid to show your faith, blah, blah. And sometimes what happens in television is that people come in at 4 o'clock, they do the games. But Dennis Eckersley and David Price have never met. And I think that kind of fed it. And I think it's unfair. I mean, I loved Eck when I covered him. He was one of the most accountable, honest people. I mean, it was never anybody else's fault. He's exactly what David Price would love as a teammate. But they don't know each other, and I think that lack of interaction can create problems. Should the general manager or the manager have done some things differently? Maybe they should have pulled them together. Maybe they should have brought Eck and David together. I think it lingered longer because it became a storyline, and I think that's the one thing. I think it created a negativity. When Price was with his teammates, it was unbelievable. I remember talking to Dana Levangie about when he went to the bullpen. Dana said it was incredible. I mean, he spent the whole time in the bullpen helping the young pitchers, because they had a lot of young relievers, working with them, telling them what situations, what to expect, blah, blah, blah. And so maybe it could have been addressed differently. But I could probably come up with about 15 of those on every team during the season, that things get out of hand and you say, oh, we should have done this, we should have done that. It's when you've got, usually average team uses 45 players during the season. And you've got that many personalities, you've got that many situations, and you're making decisions. I think there are a lot of turns that go wrong, and I think also we don't know because we can't get into their heads. I could try to talk to them about it. It's athletes are defensive about injuries. I can't tell you, nobody really knows how much of David Price this last year was the fact that he was hurt. Wasn't able to go with his teammates into a situation to go out on the field. Because Brad also always said he was the best teammate of any pitcher he ever met in his life. And Brad caught for 19 years, so he knew a few. It's hard to know. And what did he think? Did he really think his career might be over? And that creates tension around for an individual and an insecurity that we can't gauge. And they can't gauge it on a talk show because they're not at the ballpark. And I think that those things, that festered in a way that only I think could have festered in Boston.
Being in Boston, what's the relationship like between the Red Sox and other teams like the Bruins, the Pats, and the Celtics?
We have relationships with their offices. I wouldn't say it's all that close, but we exchange some information. And we actually, I'm not sure he's working in a full-time capacity, but one of our former analysts, Tom Tippett, I believe may be working with the Boston Bruins now. But we have working relationships where Brad Stevens has come and spoken to our rookie development program. Haven't had a ton of interaction with the Patriots, but at some point, now that Tony La Russa is with us, I'm sure we may see more of Belichick, just in that they're like best of friends. So, that as an Andover guy, that would be great to have Belichick around every now and then. But it's so different the way we operate that there's not a ton of dialogue with the other clubs.
Is there any thoughts where Jacoby Ellsbury might end up next year?
This is the magic question, right? I think it's this Yankee team, and I'm not sure how much you've followed it, but I think it's a lot of fun. It actually, I've been with the Yankees for 12 years. This particular team last year had the fingerprints of our whole organization on it, from amateur scouting to the pro scouting, trades, to the international scouting. Really made it a lot of fun, and it's been great getting these young players in there, and what it's created is competition. So you have Judge, you have Stanton, you have Gardner, you have Hicks, you got Ellsbury, and you got some young guys coming up. Frazier, it's even Billy McKinney. I think it's a great point in time with our organization where there is this level of competition, and I think it's going to be an interesting thing to see the effect that Aaron Boone may have on Ellsbury. Is it going to be any different? Obviously, he's a ultra talented player. We'll see what happens.
So not to bring up the Astros for like 15 times. So I think in many ways, Field would say they're a product of a very excellent tanking, where they wouldn't have Bregman, they wouldn't have Grant, or they might not have some of the other great players that teamed out tanking. And then you look at the Padres, and they've been taking for 10 years, and they haven't got anywhere. So if you're a middle of the road team at this, would you say you're more inclined that the best strategy going forward is to tank, be bad, accumulate draft picks, accumulate prospects, or is MLB basically is it better to tank, or is it better to try to push forward and try to make a playoff push?
I mean, fortunately, none of us are in that
We're not allowed
situation.
to tank in Boston. So.
But I think it is an interesting question, and a really smart question, because Yeah, I mean, if you are coming from a smaller market, you can't bank on some of the things that we can. And Theo Epstein always talked about creating a scouting and player development machine to produce players. And I think that's maybe like the minimum that any organization can do, is put a lot of time and resources into scouting and player development. But at the major league level, making a decision of losing for a couple of years in a row, I wouldn't want to be the one that has to make that decision. But I mean, honestly, it might be the right call for some teams.
But you got to do the right thing. You can't draft a right-handed pitcher from Stanford who couldn't pitch instead of the best third baseman in the National League, which Houston did.
Could you share, maybe from your organizations or your competitors, some possible breakout players for us to watch this year?
I would mention the name Keibert Ruiz, who is a 20-year-old catcher from Venezuela. He'll probably, he may start in Double-A, or he may go back to our High-A affiliate in the Cal League. But really amazingly talented kid. Hit over 300 in the Cal League last year at 19 years old. He's a switch hitter at a premium position, and I think he's going to be really special someday. You watch him hit, and it kind of looks like Victor Martinez at the plate, and I'm really excited to see what he may become. And it might not be for another couple of years, but it's definitely a name that's at the top of my list.
I think Gleyber Torres with the Yankees. He was picked up in the trade with the Cubs, and he's going to be one of our top young players, hopefully for a long time, hopefully in the big leagues fairly quickly in 2018.
What position?
He's an infielder, so we have a couple of spots, right? So I think he'll plug in, one of those. Originally shortstop. This guy, so Peter, this was interesting. I was talking to Tommy Slater, who was our Double-A hitting coach last year, and he said the real eye-opener for him with this guy who's ultra talented. There's power potential in there, good hitter, good defender, but they faced a guy and came in relief, and Gleyber goes up to Tommy Slater and goes, "This is the guy that started for us against us a couple weeks ago, right?" And Slater goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Yeah, I know him. He's got this. For a young kid to come up with that, as Slate said, some guys on that bench would be saying, "Who's this guy pitching?" He had a good understanding of who the guy was, and that's one of those intangibles we talked about. But I think this guy's going to be pretty special, and Theo's been talking about him for years, right?
Yeah, the right center field power. He's built for that ballpark.
Well, I haven't seen any of our younger, Cleveland's younger players. Of the guys that came up, nothing really jumps out, but I guess from another team, and this guy's actually been in the big leagues for a little while, a guy Whit Merrifield. I like the way he played a lot, just watching. With Cleveland, we played Kansas City 19 times a year, so we see plenty of them. I just thought he had a good approach at the plate and just one of those just solid players. Just what struck me is, someone we may not know, or, what jumps out. I don't think you wouldn't put him in the category of a superstar. I just think watching every day, not every day, 19 games, I like the way that he played.
A lot of our kids have graduated, obviously, are now in Boston, but we still have some kids we're excited about that you may see in Fort Myers. I don't know if you come down at spring training, but Michael Chavis, I would say, is one that a lot of guys are excited to see. He's been playing third base, may get exposed to first base more, just in that we could have a spot there in the next couple of years. Huge power, starting to use the whole field better. Defensively, actually came on a little bit at third base, but with Devers there, that's not going to happen. They may expose him to second base as well, maybe even the outfield. But my guess is he probably is going to fit best at first base down the road. Just big right-handed power. He's sort of a Ronce-looking body, but he's got real bat speed, loft power, and he's had a few injuries that have slowed him down, but to his credit, he's bounced back and had a huge year last year, hit around 30 home runs, 2 levels. So
I'm sure you can speak to some of the D-backs. One.
Yeah, you.
Oh,
No, the process with the Diamondbacks, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, Amiel was a tremendous success in Boston as a scouting director. That 2011 draft was one of the best in baseball history. But, you know, it takes a lot of time. I mean, I'm sure that Garrett Cole would be with the Astros if they would give up Forrest Whitley, a good friend of mine who was with the Marlins, now with the Dodgers, said to be last. That's the best pitcher I've seen all year. So they'll move him along slowly, but at 18 years old or 19, whatever he is, remember Forrest Whitley, who was about the 19th pick in the draft, if I'm not mistaken. So you don't have to necessarily have the first or second. And you know, with the Astros, they got him, I think, 19th, and 2 years in a row, they had the first pick in the country and got nothing for him.
Switching gears a little bit. This is for the scouts on the panel. A lot of high school athletes in the audience today. Everybody wants to play professional baseball. When you scout, you evaluate 5 different tools. How can you help a current high school baseball or softball player self-evaluate within the auspices of those 5 tools and get a sense of if they have a chance of being a pro-type player?
It's a good question.
My best advice would be, and it touches on the tools, but it is what you touched on. Look yourself in the mirror, and what are you worst at? Like, I always would work on the things that I liked because I was good at it, but I should have worked on my defense, should have worked on my foot speed. Work on the things that you're weakest at and try to tackle those weaknesses and hit them head on. That would be my best advice.
What if you're not bad at anything?
I know that guy, so that you have plenty of shortcomings.
You know, it's funny, the best young players I've ever been around, they have this drive to be better than what they are. It's not just to be good, it's to be great. And it's like this motor in them that they don't feel like they've arrived, okay? And I've seen plenty of guys, young players, that think that they've arrived, you know, whether it's their perfect game ranking or what people say about them or what college they've committed to, and they just stop growing as a player. And the good ones are the ones that aren't concerned with that stuff, and they just keep pushing. It's almost like this edginess that they aren't there. And you know, I was really fortunate at the University of Michigan to be around Jeter when he had just signed with the Yankees, and he never was in that mode that he had done anything yet. You know, and then, you know, when I started coaching at Michigan, I was around Brady, you know, and he had that same type of thing. And then I remember 2008 in the area code games, there was a freshman who was just unbelievable, Bryce Harper. He was in 9th grade. And the following summer we had him at Yankee Stadium for a workout. And I'm flipping him balls in the cages, and the first swing he took, it was like the 7th game of the World Series. I went, holy cow, we're actually hitting, we're going. I mean, there's no easing into this. And so when I see that, you know, I saw it from Rich Hill last winter when I saw him throw a bullpen, and for years I caught Rich. And finally he threw a curveball that hit me in the toe, and I thought I broke my toe about 5 years ago, and I said, that's it. You'd have someone else catch you. But I saw him throwing a bullpen, and I went, whoa. I mean, this was different. The intent and the purpose of every pitch and what he was trying to get out of himself, it was different. So I guess what I'd say, you know, in the self-assessing thing is don't think that you've arrived, you know, and constantly have that drive to get better, because that's what they have. That's what the good ones have.
I think that's also an easy trap to fall into, to constantly compare yourself with other people. But I don't think that's really going to do you a whole lot of good, especially at this point. I mean, what Gus talked about as far as, you know, acknowledging your own weaknesses, it has nothing to do with anybody else. And so try not to fall into the trap of like, oh, this guy throws harder than I do, or this guy runs faster than I do. So, you know, if someone in my league is better than I am, then, you know, what chance do I have competing in the national level? Like, forget about that. You know, I mean, that's not going to help your confidence, and it really has no effect over, you know, your ceiling as a baseball player. You know, look yourself in the mirror, like Gus said, figure out what it is that you can get better at, whether it's your fitness, you know, your work ethic, your drive, something physical, and you know, work your butt off, and recognize that there's a ton of sacrifice involved in becoming a professional baseball player, and it's not for everybody. Just like working in baseball isn't for everybody. You know, the sacrifice that's involved is pretty significant, and you know, be honest with yourself about that too. And if it's something that you want to pursue, great. If you have other interests, you know, there aren't too many guys, I think, playing in the major leagues, and when they do come out, it's kind of interesting, you know, to see guys with interests outside of baseball, because they're pretty singularly focused on what they're there to do.
You know, it's really interesting. So Matt Tabor here, just as an example. Okay, Matty, when you were a junior in high school in that summer, probably the spring of your junior year, throwing like mid-80s maybe, okay? Then gets in the summer, see him 87 to 89, touching a 90, somewhere in there, and you know, what did he look like? He was athletic, he had a quick arm, and he could pitch, okay? And probably at that time, Matty, pro ball was the farthest thing from your mind, right? You were gonna go to Elon, I mean, it made sense. And you can talk more about this, Matty, but you know, he really committed himself to a long toss program in the wintertime. You know, it's not like he went out and threw up a whole bunch of weight, you know? He long tossed. He did the things that you do as a baseball player. He got his arm in great shape. And so you had this athletic high school pitcher, and now you put training in there, and he comes out in the spring of his senior year, last spring, and he's up to 96, okay? And now we got a totally different animal. And I think the fun part of scouting him was we would get together like once a month in East Milton Square at a little bagel shop, and we'd talk baseball. Say, all right, and it wasn't signability, right? It wasn't, you know, are you gonna say, it was, you know, where do you think you're at right now? And I think it was this feeling that just kept on growing with you, Matty, that, yeah, I got a shot to do this. You know, but I think the fun part with him was, you know, he just kept on getting better and better and better. Right, how far, by the way, did you throw in that gym at Milton Academy?
Oh, well, it was like it was a gym probably built in the 1880s, and it was just this 40-foot high brick wall, and I would just go over there after sit-down dinner, and I would just chuck baseballs off the brick wall, and it would come fired back at me, and I'd keep doing it, keep it going. So that was it. That's what you got to do in New England, you know. So.
When did you think you could be a pro out of high school? When did that?
God, I don't even know. I mean, even after I got drafted, I thought I was going to college for a little while. So it didn't really hit me until I was on the plane, and I was like, oh my God, this is real, you know. So yeah, I was just trying to sit back and take it day by day.
Now there were some games you had to throw in front of, you know, 30, 40 scouts.
Yeah, that was I mean, I thank East Coast Pro and Area Code for preparing me for that, because they were, you know, they weren't just for me, but they were for everyone. But there were, you know, sometimes 400, 500 guys there. But no, it was I just tried to focus on, like, you know, being there for my teammates. I didn't want it to be a one-man show. I didn't want it to be like, I mean, obviously, they were there to see me, but I wanted to, focus on, high school baseball. You only get that experience once. It shouldn't be all about me. So,
the first game that I knew that you had things under control, it's when I showed up and you were setting up the music before the game.
I was the music guy.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, I made the pregame playlist and everything. Ready to go.
Peter, what's your favorite story that you've ever covered aside from the Red Sox finally winning the World Series?
I think it's more about the people. I mean, they're just people that you meet that are so unusual. They all have their own stories. But one of my favorites of the last few years, and he would be in my top 10 that I've ever known. And Matt knows him from Brewster, but Chase Utley is like one of the most amazing characters. Also, talking about concentration, he describes it. The game's over, he goes home. When he shuts the door, it goes either his hotel room or at home. That's it. The game is passed. He's completely, from that point on until he gets in the batter's box the first time, that's all he concentrates on. I mean, he completely divides his time, his mind. He's amazing at it. But Raul Ibanez and I were laughing about all the stories. I mean, he did, well, there was one on the Cape where he had been out there since like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, forgotten to eat. So gets in the bat, he's batted cleanup. And so he gets the bat boy to go there. He used to have the bread bowls of chowder. And so he figures he can eat the chowder. Oh, first guy swings at the first pitch, second guy swings at the first pitch, third guy swings at the second pitch, base hit. So he hasn't finished the chowder. So my friend Jeff McAvoy, who was pitching on that team, said it was an amazing thing that he called for time, swilled down the rest of the soup, and then hit the first pitch off the right field fence. But a year ago in the pennant race, there was a game in Milwaukee in late July when the Dodgers were winning 8-0, and Puig didn't always understand situations, and he went and stole third with 2 outs, and the Brewers were really mad about it, and so Utley leads off the top of the 9th inning, and he tells the catcher Maldonado, he said, tell the pitcher to drill me, hit me. And Maldonado, what? Tell him to hit me. It's the only way Puig's going to figure this out. He's got to figure out there are ramifications to anything that you do. And so the pitcher was scared to death, would not do it, but went ahead and did it. But so Raul and I were talking about it at the winter meetings, and he said, well, when I was with the Phillies, it was when Chapman came up, and he threw like 105 miles an hour. And Raul's a left-handed hitter and all the rest, and he said to Chase, I have no chance. I mean, I couldn't hit a ball into the batter's box off it. He said, I have no chance. And Chase, very seriously, because he's very serious, said to him, this is what you do. Get to 2 strikes, no problem, but get right up on the plate. He'll hit you. And then, so Raul went, he's still 105. I don't want to get hit by him. And Chase said, well, get on base, we might score a run. So that's one of my favorite people that I've ever covered. And actually, he called me the other day about trying to think about what he can talk about, because he's not one who interviews a lot. What he can sort of say and give back in like 150, 200 pages when he does eventually retire. It's going to be fascinating to deal with it, because he's one of the most amazing people. And leadership, I know last year, if Andrew Friedman had not brought him back, the number of phone calls from Kershaw, Hill, all the rest, he has to be back, because he's one of the rarest.
Right.
People say being a teammate isn't important. Chase Utley will end up in the Hall of Fame because he was one of the greatest teammates of all time.
So Peter Gammons, Hall of Fame reporter. We have a couple more minutes before we hit 9 o'clock. I don't know if there's anything anybody up here was dying to talk about and share in the hot stove before we come to a close, or questions for one another? Was somebody hoping to ask one of your fellow panelists anything to close us out? Any audience member? Something burning? Yes, sir. Last one.
I wonder if you guys can resolve something finally for me. I've read articles by MIT professors and physicists, and they all say by the law of physics, a thrown ball cannot rise. I sit at my seat at Fenway, beautiful view at an angle, and it's rising. Is it an optical illusion, or can it rise?
Can a
That's over
baseball
my head.
rise?
I got a high school degree.
The best thing to do is go to PitchFX and to StatCast and check out all the spin rates, and it's more about the ball sustaining its height and its power. But it is fascinating when somebody says to you, "Well, you know, his spin rate is such and such." I think it's really interesting. Teams use it tremendously, but it's those sites will explain it much better than I could possibly explain it.
Yeah, there's a stat there. It's Z-break, and it's on the TrackMan stuff. It's that thing exactly. It's how long it stays on plane, you know, and it's how a guy like Chris Young, who went to Princeton, could throw in the upper 80s, throw up in the strike zone, and get swings and misses. You know.
But the whole point is you're already a foot and a half higher, and you got to come down to the batter, you know, and then you got the laws of gravity. And so these physicists are all saying it cannot rise. But I swear, it looks like it's rising.
Softball pitchers can make it rise, that's for sure. For sure. All right, this has been a fabulous night. I hope you guys some year will come back. This will be the first of many Hot Stove Nights at Andover. Peter Gammons, Duncan Webb, Jason Bere, Matt Tabor, Gus Quattlebaum.